19th of January, 2009. The living and the dead. In Gaza, only the dead have seen the end of war. For the living, no ceasefire can make up for the daily battle of a constant quest for survival. They have no running water, gas, electricity, no bread and milk with which to feed their children. Thousands of people have lost their homes. Humanitarian aid seeps through the passes in dribs and drabs, and you get the feeling that the benevolence of the killer's accomplices is only temporary. Tomorrow, Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, will travel to Gaza, and we're pretty sure that John Ging, director of the UNRWA's field operations in Gaza, will have many stories to tell him after Israel bombed 2 UN schools, assassinated 4 of their workers, and bombed and destroyed the UNRWA center in Gaza City, reducing tons of medicine and food supplies destined for the civilian population to ashes in the process. Gaza's mountains of rubble continue to spit corpses back out onto the surface. Yesterday, in Jabalia, Tel El-Hawa, in Gaza City and Zaytun, the Red Cross paramedics, with some help from the ISM volunteers, have pulled out a total of 95 corpses from the ruins, many of which are in an advanced state of decay. Walking through the streets of the city and no longer feeling constantly terrified by the thought of a bomb surgically aimed to decapitate me, I still tremble at the sight of stray dogs gathering in a circle, imagining what could reveal itself before my eyes as constituting their meal. Relieved-looking men go back to hanging out in their mosques and cafes, but their attitude of feigned normalcy is easy to detect. Many of them have lost a relative or have nowhere to live. They pretend to go back to their everyday routine, to boost their wives' and children's morale. Somehow, even this catastrophe must be dealt with. This morning, we drove in some ambulances to the most devastated neighborhoods in the city, Tal El-Hawa and Zaytun. Questionnaire in hand, we went door to door, compiling a survey of the extent of the damages to the buildings, and wrote down the family's most urgent requirements: medicine for the sick and elderly, and rice, oil and flour, basically the essentials to feed themselves with. All that we've been able to give them so far are meters of nylon to be used in lieu of their shattered window panes to block out the cold. ISM colleagues in Rafah informed me that the municipality has handed out a few $1,000s, mere pennies, to the families who've had their houses completely razed to the ground by the bombs, the very same that, according to Israel, had only been dropped to destroy the tunnels. After the end of the conflict with Lebanon, Hezbollah had donated millions of dollars in checks to support homeless Lebanese citizens. In Gaza, embargoed and under siege, Hamas is hardly able to support its people with what would barely be enough to rebuild a barn for livestock, says Khaled, a Rafah farmer. As the truce is unilateral, Israel unilaterally decides not to respect it. In Khan Yunis, a Palestinian boy was killed yesterday and another was injured. East of Gaza City, helicopters have showered a residential area with white phosphorus. The same happened in Jabalia. In Khan Yunis today, the warships shot their cannons at an open plain, thankfully without harming anyone. But, as I write, news of advancing tanks has reached me. We're not aware of any Palestinian rockets having been fired in the past 24 hours. International journalists are clamoring for news all along the strip. They only managed to get in today. Israel granted them a pass only now that the massacre is winding down. Standing by the blackened skeleton of what remains of Al-Quds hospital in Gaza City, an astonished BBC reporter asked me how the army could possibly have mistaken the building for a terrorist's den. I said, for the very same reason that children running away from burning buildings are put in sights of snipers on the roofs, who then don't hesitate to kill them, spreading their grey matter all over the road. The journalist furrowed his brow further. The enormous difference between us eyewitnesses and the first-hand victims of the massacre, and those who heard about it through our stories, is now further highlighted. From Rome, I'm told that the EU intends to freeze the funds assigned for the reconstruction of Gaza while it's still being governed by Hamas. The European Commissioner for External Relations, Benita Ferrero-Waldner, has made her point clear on this score. Quote, "The aid for the reconstruction of the Strip," stated by the European diplomat, "will only arrive if Palestinian President Abu Mazen will once again re-establish his authority over the territory." For Gaza's Palestinians, this is an explicit invitation from the outside to engage in civil war or in a coup d'etat. It's equivalent to legitimizing the massacre of 410 children who died because their parents support democracy and freely elected Hamas. The EU is diligently echoing the criminal policy of collective punishment imposed by Israel. Why not entrust the funds to the UN or some governmental organization? The United States are free to elect a warmonger like Bush. Israel can choose leaders with bloodied hands like Sharon or Netanyahu, but we, the people of Gaza, aren't free to choose Hamas, suggested Mohammed, a human rights activist who had never voted for the Islamic movement. I had no arguments to contradict him. Living Palestinians learn from their dead. They learn to live while dying, right from the youngest age. Truce after truce, the general perception here is that of a macabre pause during which to count the dead between one massacre and another. And peace has never felt so elusive. Scouring Gaza City, on board an ambulance with the siren switched off for once, the war is still everywhere. Among the ruins of a city pillaged of smiles are now populated only by frightened gazes, eyes that insist upon scanning the sky for planes still flying endlessly overhead. Inside a home, we visited some paramedics. I noticed some pastel drawings on the floor. It was clearly a child's hand that had abandoned them after evacuating the house in a mad rush. I picked one of them up. Tanks, helicopters, and a body in pieces. In the middle of the drawing, a child with a stone had succeeded in reaching the sun's height and was damaging one of the flying death machines. It's been said that, in a child's drawing, the sun represents their desire to be, to exist. The sun I saw was crying tears of blood coloured in red pastel. Is a unilateral ceasefire enough to heal such traumas? Stay human.